Here on this video, I'm going to talk about how to use JSP and Servlet with web.xml. In recent trends, a billion bytes of data is generated on a day-to-day basis. Most of us believe in the misconception that all of the web applications are created over web frameworks like HTML, PHP. But did you know web applications can be based on Java using services like Servlet and JSP? In this article, let's delve deep into the technology and understand how it is useful for creating a web application. So, first, we are talking about web and HTTP. Web is a system of internet services that supports formatted documents. The documents are formatted using a markup language called HTML, that means hypertext markup language, that supports link to other documents like graphics, audio and video files. So, now that we know what is web, let's move further and understand what is a website. So a website is a collection of static files, example web pages like HTML pages, images, graphics, etc. And the web application is a website with dynamic functionality on the server. That means Google, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, like that. So what is the link between the web and HTTP? Let's now find out. So here, let's going to talk about HTTP. That means Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP is used by clients and servers to communicate on the web. It is considered as a stateless protocol because it supports only one request per connection. With HTTP, the clients connect to the server to send one request and then disconnect. And this mechanism allows more users to connect to a given server over a period of time. Here, the client sends an HTTP request and the server answers with an HTML page to the client. Using HTTP, that was all about HTTP and web. Okay, now let's dive deep into Servlet and understand its working mechanism. Here, Servlet is a server-side Java program module that handles client requests and implements the Servlet interface. Servlets can respond to any type of request and they are commonly used to extend the application hosted by web servers. So, that thing you can see by using this diagram. So after that, in this figure, here again you can see a client sends a request to the server and the server generates the response, analyzes it and sends the response back to the client. Here you can see it. So now let's jump into the next concept and understand Servlet lifecycle. Here, Servlet lifecycle. The entire lifecycle of a servlet is managed by a servlet container which uses a Java X servlet interface to understand the servlet object and manage it. So, the servlet lifecycle mainly goes through 4 stages. Here, first one is loading and instantiation. After that, initialized and handling request, and finally the end. So, let's talk about loading a servlet. When a server starts up, the servlet container deploys and loads all the servlets. So after that, initializing the servlet. Next, a servlet is initialized by calling the init method. Servlet init method is called by the servlet container to notify that this servlet instance is instantiated successfully and is about to put into service. So request handling, then servlet calls service method to process a client's request and is invoked to inform the servlet about the client request. So when going to talk about destroying the servlet, finally a servlet is terminated by calling the destroy method. The destroy method runs only once during the lifetime of a servlet and signals the end of the serverless instance. Int and destroy methods are called only once. Finally, a servlet is garbage collected by the garbage collector of the JVM. So this concludes the life cycle of a servlet. So now let's going to talk about steps to create servlet. In order to create a servlet, we need to follow a few steps in order. They are as follows. First thing is create a dictionary structure. Second one is create a servlet. Third is compile the servlet. Fourth, add mappings to the web.xml file. Fifth is start the server and deploy the project, and last one is access the servlet. Now based on the above steps, let's create a program to understand better how a servlet works. To run a servlet program, we should have Apache Tomcat server installed and configured. Eclipse for Java EE provides inbuilt Apache Tomcat. Once the server is configured, you can start with your program. One important point to note: for any servlet program, you need 3 files: index.html file, Java class file, and web.xml file. The very first step is to create a dynamic web project and then proceed further. So now let's take an example where I will be creating a simple login servlet and display the output in the browser. Here I'll show it by using a code example. So let's move into that. First, here I will create index.html file. Here you can see the code example, and after that I call the Java class file. Here you can see that code. So in the above code, I have sent a condition: if username, the password are equal to this name, and only then it will display successfully logged in, else login will be denied. After write the Java class file, the last step is to add mappings to the web.xml file. Let's go through that. Here web.xml file will be presented in the web INF folder of your web content. If it is not present, then you can click on deploy descriptor and click on generate deployment descriptor stop. Then after that, once you get your web.xml file ready, you need to add the mappings to it. Let's see it by using example. Here you can see the example. So this is how the servlet is created and configured. So then let's move on to the generic servlets. It is a protocol independent servlet that should override the servlet method to handle the client request. The service method accepts 2 arguments. One is servlet request object and servlet response object. Work of request object is to inform the servlet about the request made by the client, while the response object returns a response back to the client. Generic servlets is an abstract class, and it has only one abstract method, which is service. That's the whole concept when we create a generic servlet. By extending the generic servlet class, we must override the servlet method. So Okay, so now let's see how to create and invoke a generic servlet. Again, I will code 3 files as shown below. Here, HTML file, we are creating an HTML file that will call the servlet once we click on the link on the web page. Create this file in the web content folder. The path of this file should look like this. Here you can see it, and after that Java class file. Here we'll be creating a generic servlet by extending a generic servlet class. When creating a generic servlet, you must override the service method. Right click on this C folder and create a new class file and name the file as generic. So the file path should look like this. Here you can see it. So after that, web.xml, this file can be found at the path web content. Here you can see the path in this file, and we will map the servlet with the specific URL. Since we are calling the welcome page, upon click the link on index.html, it will map the welcome page to the servlet class that we have already created above. So after this, start your Tomcat server and run the servlet. You will get the desired output. So this was all about generic servlet. Now let's move further and understand the concept of session tracking. Okay, session simply means a particular interval of time. Session tracking is a technique to maintain state or data of a user, also known as a session management in servlet. So each time user requests to the server treats the request as the new request. Below figure shows how each request from the client is considered as a new request. Here you can see it. In order to recognize the particular users, we need session tracking. Now let's move further and see one of the techniques of session tracking. Example like cookies. So a cookie is a small piece of information that is deposited between the multiple client requests. A cookie has a name, a single value, and optional attributes such as a comment, path, and domain qualifiers, a maximum age, and a version number. So let's talk about how does cookie work. As it is a technique of session tracking, by default each request is considered as a new request. In this, we add a cookie with the response from the servlet, so the cookie is stored in the cache of the browser. After that, if a request is sent by the user, a cookie is added with the request by default. Now, as you have understood how cookie works, let's see a small example illustrating the use of cookies. Let's see an example of creating a cookie, adding the response and retrieving the results. Here I will be writing two Java classes files. Example, my servlet 1 and my servlet 2. Here you can see the code example. So here you can see the other code example. And now let's create a simple HTML form for cookies. Here you can see it. So now you are all set for execution. You can run the code and get the desired output. This is how a cookie works. So that was all about servlets. Now that you have gained some insights on servlets, and after that let's move ahead and understand what is Java Server Pages. Okay, here JSP or Java Server Pages is a technology that is used to create a web application, just like servlet technology. and it is an extension to Servlet as it provides more functionality than a servlet such as expressions language. And a JSP page consists of HTML tags and JSP tags. The JSP pages are easier to maintain than Servlet because we can separate designing and development. So now as we know that JSP is, let's compare JSP with servlets and understand which is best suitable for the web. So here you can see a table, advantages of JSP over servlets. Here JSP extensions to servlet and easy to maintain, no need to recompile or redeploy, less code than a servlet. So in the servlet section, not an extension to servlet, bit complicated, the code needs to be compiled, more code compared to JSP. So here I hope you understand the difference between JSP and Servlet. Now let's move further and understand scripting elements. So here let's going to talk about JSP scripting elements. The scripting elements provide the ability to insert Java code inside the JSP, and there are three types of scripting elements. So here you can see in this example we have created two files, index.html and welcome.jsp. The index.html file gets the username from the user, and the welcome.jsp file prints the username with the welcome message. And now let's look at the code. Here you can see the code. So here expression tag, the code placed with JSP expression tag is written to the output stream of the response. So you need not write output print to write data. It is mainly used to print the values of variable or method. So now let's take a small example of displaying the current time. To display the current time, we have used the getTime method of calendar class. The getTime is an instant method of calendar class, so we have called it after getting the instance of calendar class by the getInstance method. So here you can see it. And declaration tag, the JSP declaration tag is used to declare fields and methods. The code written inside the JSP declaration tag is placed outside the servlet method, the service method of an auto-generated servlet, so it doesn't get memory at each request. So here you can see it. And after that, in the below example of JSP declaration tag, we are defining the method which returns the cube of a given number and calling this method from the JSP expression tag. But we can also use JSP script let tag to call the declared method. Let's see how. Here you can see it. And so this is all about JSP scripting elements. Now let's move ahead and see request and response object of JSP. Okay, JSP request is an implicit object of type HTTP servlet request that is created for each JSP request by the web container. It can be used to get request information such as parameter, header information, remote address, server name, server port, content type, character, encoding, etc. And it can also be used to set, get and remove attributes from the JSP request scope. So let's see the simple example of request implicit object where we are printing the name of the user with the welcome message. Okay, so here you can see the example of JSP request implicit object, and after that JSP response implicit object. In JSP, the response is an implicit object of type HTTP servlet response. The instance of HTTP servlet response is created by the web container for each JSP request. It can be used to add or manipulate responses such as redirect response to another resource send error, etc. So let's see the example of response implied object where we are redirecting the response to Google. So example of response implied object, here you can see the example. So after that, this is how request and response object work. This brings to the end